Alrighty, and we are rolling on another episode of the Love That podcast. My name is Diego, and I am your host. I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in to another week's episode. Last week, we had a great show about the life and legacy of MLK, the ongoing discussions about voter rights, and the very, very apparent need for a reformation and a reinforcement, in my opinion, of voting rights and voting security in this country, especially for people of color, queer people, poor people in states that are basically just in the last bits of holding out to a conservative party that does not help its demographic or the people that they represent. It's very apparent that the lip service that we heard from a overwhelming majority of the elected officials that hold positions of power in the government office, whether it be senators, House of Representatives, governoratures, you name it, there was people everywhere touting MLK in one ear or in one corner of their mouth or one side of their mouth, and with the other side of their mouth they were basically downplaying the need for an enhancement and a reinforcement and protections of voting rights in this country, voting security in this country. There's still an ongoing pending trial involving the January 6th committee and the ex-president's involvement in the insurrection, involvement in widespread voter fraud, and disbelief in our legal system and the way that we are able to conduct free and fair elections in this country. Assault on democracy, the list can go on and on and on for the grievances that the previous administration is guilty of committing. That's a whole nother can of worms that we'll dissect on a later episode of the podcast. But with all of that being said, we are going to keep everybody, all of you listeners, abreast of everything that is going on in the world. A little side note for an update, rather, on the ongoing Maxwell trial. There has been a guilty verdict, like we discussed. And there was now an appeals filed by Maxwell's representatives, who the defense states that they wanted a mistrial because one of the jurors came forward and discussed how they personally were a victim of sexual abuse. Therein lies the defense was stating that there's a conflict of interest and a bias that the juror could have shown that would give legal leeway to an argument for a mistrial. It's yet to be seen whether or not the judge will allow that reasoning to go forward, that motion to go forward. But, you know, these are just grasping at straws. These are last minute attempts by a very evil person to try to get away with more, in the face of technicalities, like we've talked about the legal system and the need for reformation because of the ways in which people with money and access are able to get away on technicalities, whereas when it's affecting a person of color, minority, any sort of marginalization, socialized marginalization against them, find that the technicalities are what hinder us the most, and how inequities in this country continuously play a very important role, whether for the good or the bad. And we as citizens, we as the general population that would probably most be affected by these inequities, deserve justice in the situation, meaning that we need a reformation of the laws, and we need to hold people that exploit the system accountable, especially for such heinous crimes of which Maxwell has been convicted of. So that's a little bit of an update on that particular story that we discussed on the podcast. We are going to continue, like I said, continuously give updates on all the stories that we discuss. We're going to move ahead and move in forward to our discussion of this week, which I feel is building off of the last couple of weeks, a very important development, something interesting to discuss. Let's go ahead and do that. So it was just announced this week that Justice Stephen Breyer of the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the 3-6 minority liberal-leaning side of the Supreme Court, was going to retire at the end of this Supreme Court term, and that would be giving President Biden, his administration, their very first go at filling a Supreme Court seat, something that his predecessor, the 45th president, had 3 of in his one term. Now, this is important for a number of reasons. Although it will not change the makeup of the Supreme Court, it is important because of the way that the court has moved and shifted into. President Donald Trump, pains me to say it, was able to fill 3 seats in 4 years, 3 seats with 3 relatively young, and his very last appointee, Amy Coney Barrett, is very, very young. Judges that have lifetime appointments, that you're talking at least 25, and with Amy Coney Barrett, they're possibly up to 40 years of a solidified 3 conservative, super conservative justices in a constantly evolving and changing political and cultural climate. I feel that, the cards have been stacked against a majority of Americans by a super minority of Americans, meaning that when the Republicans have the opportunity to really nail, put the nails in the coffin on this political landscape and the way that things are able to be pushed into law, and the restrictions put in place, voter suppression laws, for example, they don't touch their hearts to enact everything that they can, bypass any and all laws, remove any and all precedents, and do away with any and all morality or civility. They don't care as long as it means that they're winning and the opposing party loses, even if it's at the cost of the American public. Now, with this appointee, it is very important and imperative that the dynamics of the current Supreme Court, the makeup of it, looks a lot different. As it stands, and like I said before, mentioned before, there is a 6-3 majority conservative swing that is absolute in total. There's very few things that at this point the Supreme Court will collectively agree on, because so much of what is being brought through to the Supreme Court is being pushed by fringe conservatives for an expansion of their ideologies throughout the country, even though the majority of the country tends to swing towards what are considered to be progressive pieces of legislation or progressive ideology, and in some parts considered and labeled to be socialist, those kind of buzzwords that the right-wing media loves to hone on, right-wing people love to shout from the rooftops. Now, as it stands, there are currently 3 women on the Supreme Court. 2 of them are women that would swing towards the more liberal side, and then Amy Coney Barrett is the sole Republican Supreme Court female judge. There are only one there is only one man of color on the Supreme Court. There is only 2 people of color on the Supreme Court in total. Justice Clarence Thomas, then there is Sonia Sotomayor, and the rest of them are 2 white women, and the rest are white men. Now, with the retirement of Justice Stephen Breyer, the promise that Joe Biden made to the country at large, a campaign promise is that he wanted to fill that seat with a Chief Justice that was a black woman. With the demographics of the Supreme Court being what they are and how I just mentioned, it's imperative and obvious to me why it would be radically important for a black woman, a liberal black woman, to sit on that bench for the sake of legacy, honestly, at this point, because like I said, there is no way to shake up the political swinging of the Supreme Court, but there is a way to solidify at least a portion of the country, a majority of the country's position in the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court, in my opinion, should more accurately represent the political makeup of that time. You know, there is 9 judges. In order to have some sort of, the idea was to have some sort of equivalency on both sides, 4 and 4, and somebody is always a swing vote, is always a swing judge on a deciding case, because these cases are supposed to be something that are pulled apart by technicalities, legalities, and not biased interpretations. But that's basically what they are, because that's what judgments are. You know, it's a biased interpretation of law, and that's kind of how we have catered the system to be, and we haven't really made any reformations on it, and we're suffering the consequences of it, very evidently, in my opinion. Now, if in fact President Biden does select a black woman to be the next Supreme Court nomination, she would join a very select group in this country. If this happens, would be one of only 6 women to ever hold a Supreme Court office, chair position. She would join Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the first, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was the second, Sonia Sotomayor, Aliga Kanan, Amy Coney Barrett, and then they would be the 6th. I think of, was it 115 justices. So 110 out of the 115 have been men. That percentage is 95.7 for those of you who are just curious, which is wild, just wild. But, you know, once again, we're reiterating the importance of the Supreme Court, especially when we're having talks about women's bodies and reproductive justice and autonomy for women in this country, and people who give birth. It's imperative for the demographics to be more representative of the general population. It's important, you know, there is a need for women to be making decisions in this country, especially black women, women of color, not just 2 white women and 1 Latina. That's not enough, you know, and moving even beyond that to getting Asian women, getting Polynesian women, getting Middle Eastern women, you know, expanding this. And moving forward, I think another important conversation would be the possibility of implementing term limits. That might be more of a hard sell to a lot of people, because historically justice appointments are lifetime appointments. They are, in this case, either something that you retire from, like Justice Breyer will be doing at the end of his term, or in the case of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you have a justice that passes away, and thus the seat needs to be filled. And I think it would be a more accurate representation of our democracy if there was some sort of term limit to it, because it is actually the only position of office in our government that is a lifetime appointment, something that you don't continuously have to either get the votes for, or there's a limit on your ability to enact in that office, like there is for the presidency, like there is for senators and representatives, government officials, anybody that holds an elective office. And it's because they're not elected offices, we don't really have a say in who fills these positions. This is something that gets done through the executive branch. Presidents throughout history have been able to make appointments for judges, and that's kind of why a lot of the time there's a lot of money and attention put into the general elections, even though the midterms are just as important. Any election is important, but the executive branch does have the power to put in appointments, and based on how the makeup is of the Senate at that time and how willing they are to hear the other side's appointments, judges are put into the federal, appellate, district level, every single level of the courts. And this is how you have justices that will have biases, and you will see the discrepancies in the justice system in how law is applied based on the ideology with which they associate. And once again, it's a shame that we have to be wary of somebody's ideology and whether or not they're going to be objective in their job, when their sole purpose is to be objective and just look at the laws and apply them fairly. So this is, very important dialogue and discussions to be had surrounding everything that is to come. I think that Biden will probably never have the support of the Republican Party, so the way that his appointee will have to be confirmed will be the same way that most of the laws will have to be confirmed, is by the 50 Democrats that we do have vote yes on his appointee, and Kamala Harris as the VP will give the swing vote to put in position whoever he chooses to be the next Supreme Court justice. There have been a lot of names thrown into the mix, and probably it's a little bit too early to be kind of ruminating over who it might be, although the different news stations have obviously put out a lot of names of people that they think would be great for the position. Although I think the who does matter at this certain juncture of everything. It's not particularly important to the conversation that we're having. This is another reason why this discussion, I feel like, is another reason why we should be encouraged to come out and vote, and to be very informed about who it is that we're voting for and who it is that they believe in, especially for positions like the governor, positions like the president, senators, because they get to have a say in who fills lifetime appointments on the federal courts, and it's incredibly important that we choose people that will represent us fairly and that are of good moral standard, especially in times where very fundamental and basic human rights issues are being contested for political gain. We're in 2021 and women are still having to fight about whether or not their bodies are their choice. We're in 2022. See, we're in 2022 and we're still having to walk over the elephant in the room, which is this country doesn't want to deal with racism and white people don't want to hear about it. Ergo, in Florida, I heard about Governor DeSantis, who's literally the king of Florida, I guess, is trying to pass through the governor's office. Their legislator is trying to pass a law that will inhibit anybody from discussing the term gay or the word gay in the classroom, which is just like the next step on all of the foolishness. First of all, they don't want to talk about racism. They don't want white people to feel guilty, white children to feel guilty or shameful or learn about the horrible history that we have. Then it was they don't want people to read books. Then it was no MLK. Then now it's no more gay. It's just, it's, very 2008, it's just ridiculous. And that's why it's so important for our constituents, our communities to come together, rally together, and collectively say, this is not okay. This is not what I believe in, whether you agree or not, because at the end of the day, you are entitled to feel however it is you want to feel. But where all of us get mixed up is trying to impose that on other people. In your home, in your life, you can do whatever you want, but you can't do that to other people and expect for that to be the norm everywhere. Common decency comes before anything personal, because when it's either you or somebody else, they're always going to think that they have the upper hand, unless it's a very common thread kind of issue that we're discussing. And issues like abortion, issues like racism, issues like homophobia are very cut and dry, and we can't be having these discussions where we're in the middle of a global pandemic almost 3 years in, and we're still having to have discussions about race and abortion. It's like, no, we need to be able to move on. We're still even trying to have people get vaccinated. And once again, Diego's little monologue about it: go out and get vaccinated, go get your boosters, mask up, go get your free mask, order your tests, do anything and everything in your power to making sure that you're protecting yourself, your children, your friends, your family from the virus and its variants. We don't want to get sick, everybody. Make sure you're up on your teas and your vitamins, not just the mask and the vaccines. This is holistically, we should be looking at everything and making sure that we're living healthier lives, especially when we're in the midst of chaos, right? So we should be doing our duties on all fronts, especially, it's the mind, the body, the spirit. It's the voting, it's the conversations, the tough conversations, it's the having fun, it's the taking care of yourself, it's everything. This is a full rounded experience that we have as human beings living on this great country that we call the United States of America. This is all the stuff that we have to do. But back to our initial conversation, with the appointment that will be looming, it is another super important pivotal moment in Biden's presidency for a number of reasons, especially considering the contention that he's had with specifically Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, and to see where they'll stand with the appointment of Joe Biden. This should be a very cut and dry issue. Joe Biden will pick a black woman, a very successful, intelligent, and smart judge, one of the many federal judges that he can choose from, and both of them and the other 48 senators should agree. I mean, realistically speaking, everyone should agree on his appointment, but at least the 50 and Kamala should be in agreement with that. And if not, once again, open your eyes, everybody. If these two Democratic senators do not agree with the Democratic president's appointee for the Supreme Court, given the majority that the Republicans already have, the conservative majority already has in the Supreme Court, what does that tell you about who they are and what they think and who they are actually for? Because there is no reason for them to want to hold up or have any contention with whoever Joe Biden appoints, because whoever he appoints would have no real ability to do anything to change the decisions coming out of the court, because they already have the majority that they want for the majority of the issues that they are presenting in the cases being brought up to the Supreme Court. This is a very telling and important moment, and a very important moment for Joe Biden, important moment for Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, but very important as well for Joe Biden to be able to rally his party together. And I think it would be very important, pivotal, and needed for him to appoint this, whoever he chooses, his new appointee, a black woman, whoever that may be, to appoint them, then immediately move forward with passing as much of the Voting Rights Acts as he possibly can, and do so on the back of this kind of political gesture to the constituents, capitalize on the importance of the moment, what it would represent to the country, being that would be the first black woman to ever hold a Supreme Court seat, pass voting rights to ensure voting security and legitimacy for all Americans, but especially people of color, poor people in this country, who throughout Republican states and governors and legislators have had their votes stripped back, their access to voting stripped back. It's an attack on mail-in voting, on voting boxes, on ready availability to participate in civics. This is civics 101 is voting. And for anybody to try to prohibit that is asinine and totally un-American, in my opinion. And I think that's very fair, because voting is supposed to be something that we all should participate in. What's wrong with wanting to make voting, National Voting Day, a holiday, paid holiday? That would be great. We could all take it off and engage, and whatever the decision is, we make it all together as a country. That was what I felt was so beautiful about the 2020 election, was that we had nothing else to do but participate in our democracy, and it made a huge, huge, huge difference, because we changed the trajectory of this country. Even though we've had a very tough last year, I can't even begin to imagine what it would have been like if we had made a different decision in the election last year. All right, so I think that's going to do it for our discussion for this week. I know it's a little bit shorter than we're used to here on the podcast, but this week's Love That segment is going to be a little political, and maybe that was a little hint for all of you who may already know what it's going to be. But I wanted to have a little conversation about something that happened in the political sphere this week that that tickled me pink, and I was absolutely loving. So let's go ahead and move into this week's Love That segment. Alrighty, so for this week's Love That segment, what I was loving this week was the press conference that President Biden gave. I think it was after a summit with like NATO allies, European allies. This is all in reference to the ongoing tensions with the UK with the Ukraine, Russia border sort of stall crisis kind of contention that's going on, where basically everybody is assuming and under agreement that Russia is trying to impose their military forces and expand their border into the Ukraine border, which is something that the NATO allies, the US included, does not want to happen, because they do not want to see an expansion of Russia in that region. Now, after the whole summit, the press was giving their questions, that ended, and then they were ushered out. As they were ushering out, I think his name is Peter Doocy, from Fox News. As he was walking out, he asked the president if he felt that inflation was a political liability in the ongoing midterm elections. And to which Biden responded and and said, no, it's not a liability, it's an asset, and went on to say, what a stupid son of a bitch. In a moment that that I think for all intents and purposes was a great like political moment for him. And Joe Biden is known to make kind of non quote unquote professional remarks in different moments throughout his career. You know, with Obama, he had a moment like that. Throughout his tenure in the Senate, you know, his decades long career in the Senate, he's just been characterized as like sometimes he'll cut through the BS of the moment and just say what everyone else wants to say kind of thing. And he had a definite I guess he just really spoke from the heart and was just like, what a stupid son of a bitch. If you haven't seen that clip, I think that you probably should look out. I think I saw it on NPR, on Instagram. It's literally everywhere. You can search it on Twitter, you can search it on YouTube. Everybody was talking about it, and it was funny to me. At first it was funny, then it got funnier after I found out that at Fox News they brought him on, and the Fox News people were like, yeah, you are a stupid son of a bitch. So I was just like, wow. It was kind of a moment that I knew that there was going to be some sect of the conservative fringe that was gonna be like, oh well, see, he's calling people out and he's doing this and he's doing that, and they're doing the same thing and da 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 da. But I don't know if pleasantly surprised is the word, but I was definitely surprised that a lot of people had the same reaction of just like, oh, that was a funny moment, that was just an exchange. And so it was just very surprising, first of all, their reaction. Secondly, I found out later that President Biden called and apologized to that reporter for what he said, and even went on to say, you know, I know that you're going to keep on asking the questions, like the questions that nobody else is asking, and you should be asking whatever questions you feel are important. And, you know, that shows that the president said what he said, but also understands the importance of the First Amendment and the ability of the press to ask questions, however unfair or annoying as they may be. Now, that was, you know, awesome and everything. And it was also because at a certain point I started to think about it, this whole entire situation, and it got me really thinking. And it was something that, you know, I definitely loved that he did that and he engaged in that particular way. I found it to be refreshing, because I feel in this current climate, people want the theatrics, they want the show, they want the hot mic moment, they want the Twitter moment, they want the sensationalized moment that we can all say, oh, this is what he said, oh, the kind of comments that we were used to in the last 4 years. And while I may be annoyed that, and I don't think that necessarily the president should be more known for the comments, the stupid comments or Twitter comments that he makes versus the legislation or his ideology, but it's been proven that that's what's going to work and what gets engagement. So if this is what gets people engaged with Biden and his agenda and his policies, then so be it. And I also just found it so refreshing that we finally just cut the BS, and we're just like, you know what, Biden was like, oh, he's so dumb. Like, and it was just so sincere. And it was just like, you just knew that that's what he was thinking in the moment. And he just said it. And I don't even know if he realized that the mic was on or what was going on, or he just didn't care in that moment. He was just like done with the BS. But, I appreciated that. I thought it was refreshing. I thought it was definitely something that was needed. And I look forward to more honest and refreshing kind of moments like that from the president, not necessarily needing to use expletives or, or to quote unquote demean somebody really, but more just to be like, that's not accurate, that's not real, that's not honest. And just calling people out in however he may see fit. I think this is something that is also important to mention, because I recently saw an interview that the VP Kamala Harris had on Good Morning America, I think with Chase Melvin, I think the name of the interviewer was, in which I've been seeing so many people like ask these crazy questions to the vice president in a way that I just feel like these news reporters are just doing crazy stuff, like just asking all these ridiculous questions. And because she was asked, oh, how do you feel about you possibly not being on the ticket for the next general election? It's like she's barely 1 year into her being the vice president. She was sought after to be the vice president for a very specific reason. Not only because of her politics, her personality, but also what she would represent to everybody in the country, to the constituents. They wanted to see a more equitable and diverse election ballot, or ticket as they refer to it. And also, she is somebody that is a great articulator, a great arguer, as seen by her debate with Mike Pence. And they're constantly going at her, I feel like, and asking her all these crazy questions, trying to get like a moment again, like they've gotten through the debates. And it's like, when you're having an interview with the vice president, you should be trying to get information, not trying to throw jabs or throw digs. You're trying to understand their policies and and what it is that they're saying. It's not like you're interviewing somebody like Donald Trump, who has talked about degrading women, has degraded women on camera, or has lied about who he is, what he is. You're talking to a vice president, Kamala Harris, who has been tasked with incredibly complex and inherited issues like immigration, like the pandemic response, voting rights. It's an intense disparity in what it is that these people represent on so many levels. And I think in this Love That segment, I loved that Joe Biden just cut the crap and just like said what he said and felt what he felt, and everybody just backed him up and said, you know what, Joe Biden, you're right, he is a stupid son of a bitch, and that was that, and period, and whatever, and it was done. So I'm hoping that Kamala has more moments like that, like she did with the Charlemagne the God moment. That was everything. To be honest, I can't even remember if I talked about it on the podcast, but I think I did. I think I did talk about it, and she was like, "No, Charlemagne, no, that's not what we're gonna do." Da 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 da. Like, more of that, because although I don't wish to see the vice president so aggravated that she has to like raise her voice and like kind of scold in a way somebody, but if that's what you need to do to stand up for yourself and get your point across, then so be it. I wish that they would ask her the questions so that she could answer them in a way that we can understand everybody, and understand the points and get everything clear. But when they're asked dumb questions to try to throw a jab or a diss, you can't expect for somebody to respond to you with beauty and kindness. It's like, you throw a dig and a jab and a this and a that, you're going to get fought back with, especially with somebody as articulate and good at arguing as I think Kamala Harris is. So I look forward to more moments with the president and vice president where they can kind of relate more to the general public, because the general public probably doesn't have the composure that the president and the vice president are asked to have day in and day out. And so when we see them have these very human responses, although it's probably not the best thing in the grand scheme of things, at a time when we're so divided and there's such disparity with messaging and with understanding on part of the public, with this administration specifically. I think these kind of moments do a great service to everybody, but especially the administration. So I was definitely loving the look. I was loving everything about it. So we're gonna make a meme. Stupid son of a bitch. What a stupid son of a bitch is gonna be a meme. Definite now. We did it, Joe. We made another meme. But yeah, that moment for sure, it got my wheels turning, and it was a definite, salute to the president for that. We love that. Definitely, we love that. But with all of that being said, we have reached another episode, the end of another episode of the Love That podcast. Short and sweet episode today, guys. It was very cut and dry. I felt like we just had to make our points made. We had to talk about the things that were going on. Busy week, lots of things going on. And lots of things to come. Make sure y'all are checking out the social media, telling your friends, passing the word along. Make sure y'all are staying vaccinated, y'all are staying boosted, y'all are staying well and healthy. If it's cold, wear a jacket. Don't get sick. Don't put your guard down just because you think that it's over. Hopefully, we'll get out of this wave and there'll be a new variant, and hopefully it'll be a lot less contagious. It'll be like that one that was in Australia or something like that. It was like Lemathia or something like that. It was something dumb, but whatever. We just gotta stay safe. We just gotta stay doing our part. So let's all do that. We'll meet back here next week for an all new episode of the Love That podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Y'all stay well, stay healthy, and we'll meet back next week. Okay, love y'all. Bye. Be sure to follow the podcast on social, on Twitter, and on Instagram at the Love That Pod, where we have a direct link in the bio on both of those social media platforms where you can subscribe to our Spotify channel to make sure that you are never missing out on any new episodes of the podcast. The Love That Podcast is a show hosted by Diego Romero, produced, mixed, mastered, and editing by Diego Romero.